everyone, and welcome to the Digital Cities Lunchtime Panel session in partnership with Hello Culture. My name's Alipoor, and I'm artistic director of the Alipoor Company. I'm a theatre maker, a filmmaker, and a digital artist. Today, we're going to be exploring how digital platforms enabled protest and activism in art during the lockdown. You know, you remember that moment a few months ago, the way that movement broke out, Black Lives Matter, decolonisation, statues falling. Lockdown, that period of it, saw the biggest demonstrations and activism wave that we'd seen for a long time. It felt like a moment that finally began to challenge the systemic and institutional cultural frameworks that have been part of the barriers that have marginalised and minoritized, racialized people for decades, if not centuries. This sort of breaking of the veil was achieved through physical protests, as well as the way that they were reflected and shaped online. Demonstrations like the Black Squares on Instagram, if you remember that, and anti-racist slogans of various kinds. But beyond those squares on Instagram, cultural activism carried on burning bright online. So what happens next as the world continues to burn as it does? Today's panel will seek to answer this question and explore some of the activism and art that's been created and evolved over lockdown. To give us their unique insights, I'm delighted to be joined by some really brilliant panellists. We've got Stella, Kanu, who is Executive Director at London International Festival of Theatre. She's worked in the theatre, festival and cultural sector for over 27 years, and most recently created the concept design for Black Women in Theatre. She's co-curator of BWINT events and the hashtag We Are Visible movement. Amahra Spence is a cultural producer, artist, co-founder and creative director at MAIA, and amongst other things is currently developing Yard, an art house project made up of event, living and art spaces in the Midlands. Our final panellist is award-winning producer, director and writer for TV and film, Jenkins. He's one half of the founding team of Bristol-based Black Wave Productions. He's recently directed the documentary The Shadow of Slavery as part of the Channel 4 series Take Your Knee Off My Neck, and also a short spoken word film for the BBC Arts, Culture and Quarantine season called We Are Not the Virus. So, hello and welcome everyone. Before we get started, there's a couple of bits of housekeeping info. One is that, of course, closed captions are available if you look at the bottom of your screen by clicking on CC that you'll see on that bottom row. There's an option there to view the full transcript as well as displaying the scrolling subtitles, and we'll be recording this session, so if you've missed anything or you're sort of struggling with that pacing, you'll be able to watch it again on the Hello Culture website. And as ever, we'll be putting your questions to the panel, so you can whack them in the chat down the side and we'll do our level best to get through as many as we can. So we'll kick off with Executive Director at London International Festival of Theatre, Stella Kanu.
Thank you. I wanted to start off by saying that one of the really key things during 2020, at least for me, a distinct feature of organising digitally has meant a focus on working outside of organisations, being put to one side and being replaced for one that kind of amplifies the personal and organising outside of organisations. And this is really vital for outsider voices that can often be absorbed in organisations. You know, liberation and autonomy, and very old-fashioned words, are collective and personal constructs. And the digitally organising that we've seen in the last 14 months or so has given room to that. And I think that that's kind of really important. And so activism is often associated with, rightly so, with high emotions like anger and frustration. But one of the things that I used digitally organising with a whole group of other people around All of Us in the Here to Stay programme is trying to tap into emotions associated with emotional justice, which is a kind of slightly different to social justice in some ways, and really trying to focus on the protest of care. And so All of Us was all about emotional justice. I'm going to give you a little bit of a clip for the online protests that we kind of started with. So All of Us, just to be clear, All of Us was the campaigning side, and the Here to Stay programme was actually the programme that supported Black, Asian and ethnically diverse cultural workers who were at risk of or had been the result of redundancies after COVID from loads of organisations across the cultural sector. All of Us, the campaign, used a combination of online organising, some kind of privately and some very, very publicly, to kind of highlight the danger and the kind of sidelining that lots of cultural organisations were in danger of enacting through those redundancies. And so what we wanted to do was to galvanise people, not in a kind of environment of blame, which there seemed to be some pitting against one another at some point in the middle of 2020, where it was organizations on one side and individuals on another and freelancers somewhere else. And what we decided to do with the All of Us campaign is to find a way to kind of galvanize this kind of protest of care that recognized that we could all kind of contribute to making a quiet but impactful change. And so we used the GoFundMe platform, we used Twitter, Instagram, and we created this one short video that we're going to play now.
We know that the arts sector is not ethnically diverse.
92% of Arts Council funded organisations are white-led.
Applications that come from Black, Asian and ethnically diverse people are 3 times more likely than white applicants to be rejected at the first round.
But we know we have massively contributed to the arts sector. For example, in British theatre,
plays under Eclipse Theatre's Revolution Mix programme, such as Black Men Walking and The Gift, attracted almost 30,000 audiences over 4 tours. Director Matthew Zia's 2018 production of Frankenstein at the Manchester Royal Exchange saw the biggest spike in sales to under 25-year-olds in over 10 years of the theatre's production. 4 out of the 6 Bush Theatre's best-selling shows ever were written by Black or Asian writers. For The High Table, 45% of the audience were Black, Asian or mixed race.
And there are many, many more examples across the whole creative and cultural sector. But right now, due to COVID-19, the sector is facing high levels of redundancies. Inc. Arts data shows that Black, Asian and ethnically diverse people are overrepresented in public-facing, education and community engagement roles, as well as casual and freelance roles. The fear is that those who are in these roles will be the first to be made redundant,
if they haven't been already. Here to Stay recovery package by Black Women in Theatre and Eclipse Theatre, and in partnership with the Bush for Black, Asian and ethnically diverse people who have been affected by redundancies. The package includes financial assistance, coaching and mentoring, wellness and mental health care, and CV application and interview support.
We need to make sure that our contributions that we have been making for decades and decades doesn't stop.
Because it's about all of us.
So what we tried to kind of show there in our organising was that there was a potential for this kind of conversation that had taken place before COVID, which is really focused on diversity and inclusion and how there is such a lack. There is a lack of people, there is a lack of contribution. And what we wanted to do with All of Us and the Here to Stay programme was to both safeguard that contribution, but also to shout about it. And that is a whole nother exercise about recentering the conversation around protest from those that we're protesting against to us as the collective, as the people that are impacted. And that kind of came and started from 2019 with the We Are Visible campaign, which again was about reframing the conversation and the narrative around diversity from one that's really focused on the lack of numbers and statistics, that fails to recognize that this beautiful photograph does recognize that we are here. We are visible and we exist, and wanting to reframe the conversation from one away from invisibility to one of visibility. And I think that digital organizing in this instance with the We Are Visible campaign was done completely privately. So we had spent 8 weeks communicating digitally with more than the 250 women that are on this screen behind the scenes. And that's also really important, the way that digital organizing can have this kind of front-facing element to it that is often about the end product, but there are these huge, huge waves of organizing and administration and communication and fine-tuning the message that kind of takes place alongside it. One of the things, just to finish, and I'll pick up on some of these other points that I'm making during this slide later on in the questions. But one of the other things that we've been doing at Lift is working with the Nest Collective, which is a Kenyan-based collective of artists across multidisciplinary art forms, to explore how does digitally organizing kind of translate to the creative work. And so we've been working with them during COVID on a kind of collaborative remote filming process, completely new to us, and trying to work it out as we go along, but using that to kind of profile activists across the globe. And this will be culminated in a project and a sharing, hopefully an exhibition that will launch in 2022. But again, it's about all the ways that digital organizing and protesting and activism online can have all of these kind of outputs. So yeah, that's kind of me in a short nutshell of what I've been doing, along with a host of other people during 2020. Thank you.
Thank you, Stella. That's like hugely inspiring stuff to hear about, and I've certainly got a bunch of questions that I want to ask about that when we get to the end. Our next panelist is Michael Jenkins. He, during lockdown, Black Wave, his company, produced several short films which charted Bristol's Black community's experience of the pandemic and the city's response to the killing of George Floyd, and of course the iconic pulling down of the Colston statue on the 7th of July. So yeah, Michael, I'll hand over to you.
Great, thanks for that, Javad. And yeah, great to be on this panel and having this discussion. So I think, I mean, just a little bit of background around me. So I'm a producer, director, sort of self-shooting filmmaker from Bristol, born in Bristol. And my journey started off within filmmaking. I mean, I always sort of saw filmmaking as a way of sort of expressing or raising awareness of things that were happening within the Black community. And this is how I really started getting involved in it. I mean, I did initially start through doing music, making music videos, but it wasn't until I started learning about documentaries and how, you know, films can be made to create change, which is when I really started getting into making films. I didn't go to university. I mean, I dropped out of college and when I left school, so I didn't have any formal training in making films. I sort of learned from, you know, watching lots of YouTube and going out and doing it. And it wasn't until I filmed a story, which was my first documentary, which was called Black Soldier, White Army. And that was about a Black soldier that I'd met, really charismatic person. And hearing his story, he was the first sort of army vet that a Black army vet that I'd met. And he was really just, you know, explaining to me what it was like fighting in Northern Ireland during the Troubles in Ireland in the 80s, and what he went through. And I felt like, and making that film and documenting that and seeing people's reactions to that really gave me the spur to really pursue filmmaking. Another example of sort of activism or raising awareness that I was trying to do with my films was I got commissioned by the Avon and Somerset Police. That's the police organisation down here. And got commissioned by them to make a film for them about stop and search and how it disproportionately affects Black people, and how does that make people feel, and it was going to be used as a training tool for officers. So yeah, that was really an interesting experience. I was filming around various different places, and ironically, while making that film, I was actually stopped myself by the police and interrogated, even though I was actually being, you know, commissioned by the police to make this film. I myself was subject to this stop and search, and I feel like it helped to illustrate the issue. Even someone like me, even a professional that's going about their business, can still be seen as a target, can still be seen as that they're up to no good. So I mean, and that really did help when I put that film out. That did really help to raise awareness of the issue around stop and search. And I think it was about a year after that I started filming this whole Colston issue and what was happening with Colston. So growing up in the city, having this statue, having all these different things named after, all to do with slavery, all connected to slavery. The issue around Colston and the name of certain buildings, such as the Colston Hall, the name of certain streets, and particularly the statue, has always been a point of contention from as long as I can remember, especially within the Black community. It's always been something that I've been well aware of for a long time. But it wasn't until about 5 years ago, a group called Countering Colston got together, a group of activists got together and really started to do protests and raise awareness of this issue around Colston and this love that the city sort of has for this figure. But the love is not really, it's not a 360 view of this figure that you're given. So I was following the Countering Colston lot as they were doing what they were doing, capturing sort of all different things that were going on, all the different protests that they were doing. So it was something that I'd been filming for about 5 years. And obviously when lockdown happened, everything stopped. So filming sort of stopped. But what was really interesting was the reaction to the George Floyd murder that happened in America, and the way people just galvanized people in the UK. And I filmed the Black Lives Matter protest that happened in Bristol about 4 years ago. So when I heard that another one was happening, it was a no-brainer that I had to go down there and film it and capture it. And yeah, we went down there, and you know, the unthinkable happened, because nobody was expecting that to happen. I mean, I did have a little bit of a feeling. I was thinking, what if they take down the statue? That would be crazy. And when I went down there, I saw it was gone, and I was just completely in shock. So I think we're going to play now a clip of the film that I made for Channel 4 called The Shadow of Slavery. This is a co-production with Milk and Honey Productions and Black Wave. And it's just really captured that time and the feeling at the time. So if we can run that.
Colston was one of the, well, some people see him as one of the fathers of the city, I suppose. He was a well-known philanthropist, and hence, you know, streets and schools and so forth being named after him. But he was also a slaver, possibly 70 to 80,000 or so African lives being traded by Colston through his merchant ventures.
It's like the photo ledger, the plastic texture, synthetic go-getter. Black Lives Matter! It's like the
being black and stuff, it ain't easy. You don't get treated right. So I just felt like I had to contribute and be there and stand up with my people then. Why should us as black people should be going downtown, seeing a statue representing slavery? Like, I don't reckon that's right. That statue should have never have been in our sight.
The atmosphere was just alive. Like the cheering and the happiness that we felt. This slave owner being dragged down and finally making that statement, and it just was incredible. We had black people, we had white people, we had Asians, just everybody coming together. It was an empowering, beautiful experience.
Hello, Bristol!
I love black people, I love my people. It's my identity. Even though it is a risk being in the protest, especially with the pandemic, it was beautiful to see so many people come out from different backgrounds and come and raise awareness for a great cause.
Are you clued up on what it means to have white privilege and how you can use it positively?
Racism is real, and we need to address white people when we talk about racism. And we need to ensure that they know that we need them to be real active allies.
Thanks for that. Yeah, so you can, that's on the Channel 4 website if you want to watch the rest of it. But that was, you know, I was there captioned just right in the thick of it, right in the heart of it. And it was definitely a euphoric feeling after spending years filming this statue. To see it in a different perspective, to see it on the floor was definitely very shocking. So just to sort of round up and end off, you know, I do believe passionately that film is a tool that can, you know, change the world. Whether that's through documentaries or through drama. I mean, this is a picture that you're seeing right now of me on set recently in lockdown with a film that I made called Pickney. And you know, this film is just, again, telling an untold story about, you know, issues within the Black community, or things, or the way people deal with death within the Black community. It's just one of those films. And just lastly, before I go, the last thing I want to mention is that, yes, I mean, I am an activist at heart, and working in Bristol for many years, I've noticed, you know, that there's things missing. So my business partner, Dr. Mina Fombo, and I decided to launch, we were working on it for months beforehand, but when the statue fell into the, got ripped down and chucked into the water, we decided to launch our project, which was, it's called the Bristol African Caribbean Culture Space. And what it is, it's a multi-purpose space, which is going to be located on a barge in the heart of the city, on those historic waters where the, you know, where the slave trade, where all the money was made from the slave trade. We feel like it's about time Bristol as a city did something to recognize its past and to commemorate it, memorialize it in some sort of a way. What we're creating is a Black arts barge, essentially, where people will be able to experience arts and culture from the Black community, but also learn about the history of those waters, which have a deep connection to Africa and the Caribbean. And Shirley just put a link in the chat so you can find out more. We've got a GoFundMe and a website. But yeah, thanks for having me, and I look forward to the Q&A.
Thanks for that. Like, super interesting chat again. Really great to have you, and I look forward to asking you some questions when we get towards the end. Our final panelist is Amahra Spence, who is co-founder and creative director at MAIA, which is a company that explores opportunities for artists to live, work, and contribute to society. So, Amahra.
Hello, thank you so much for inviting me to be present today. So my name is Amahra Spence, and I am an artist and organizer. And I often am asked, like, what is the correlation between like all different sides of my practice? And I realized that from a very young age, I was fascinated with world building. I loved that literature gave me the license to imagine and immerse myself in new worlds. I started writing stories. I became really immersed in the world of theatre making and music, and I became fascinated with what it means to build and imagine new worlds, and slowly developed a practice in and around space, and every which way we mean space. And I was thinking about what gave me the license to imagine myself in that capacity, what gave me the license to think about urban planning, what gave me the license to think about movement and physical infrastructure. And one of the earliest catalyst for that thinking was hip hop. I began, like, I'm a massive hip hop nerd, I need to say that, but I began thinking and realizing that hip hop, and similarly, you know, I'm a child of the grime and garage era, but these were genres that were effectively, you know, social critiques of their environment, that they were articulating frustrations and restrictions and boundaries with which people were living in. And hip hop really was a social critique to that. And I started to think, like, what would it mean to use hip hop as a teaching tool to imagine beyond the paradigms that currently exist? And I developed a project called Beats, Rhymes and Cities, which basically works with lots of different types of facilitators and artists. And they come together and they work with children, young people and elders, and we go through a process where we're generating data from our creativity. So we've got beat makers and producers, we've got poets, we've got illustrators, and they come together and they workshop and generate data, which with generative technology and design, we can then input it into a system and create hip hop responsive architecture or grime responsive architecture. And suddenly then we're having a conversation with like little 3D printed models. We map out a city and we're having a conversation about urban planning. I've done it with 6-year-olds. And what we realize is lots of people have so much to say about their neighborhoods, but more than that, they've got so many hopes and ambitions and ideas about their neighborhoods and the places that they live. But so often we know that the people with the most energy and passion and ideas about the place are most disconnected from resources needed to make change happen there. And that was one of the thoughts behind setting up MAIA. So in 2013, realizing that there was this differentiation between who has access to resources and who is able to realize their dreams and who isn't, and how creativity and art is a manifestation of what does dream work look like. We set up MAIA to say, how do we build infrastructure for liberation? How do we support people to be their whole selves, to invest in creativity in a radical sense and in a pragmatic sense, because we fundamentally believe that art and art thinking has the power to change the world. And one of the things that became really important, we set it up in 2013, we've been on a really long journey since then, but all of the events of 2020 reminded us, because we know that 2020 exacerbated, you know, the social challenges and environmental challenges of our time long before 2020. So 2020 reminded us that resources aren't redistributed equally. So one of the first things that we did was inspired by Luke Barnes, who set up a coronavirus emergency fund for artists. We set one up for the West Midlands region, and our intention initially was to raise £200 and give £200 grants to a small number of people, and it was, you know, we acknowledged in the first instance that there are going to be so many people that fall through the gaps in terms of any state provision, in terms of benefits, in terms of grants to come, and we know that so many people had just had only just become self-employed, so many people were sort of in between jobs, so many people had an income history that was really up and down, so they weren't going to generate enough income to live off. So all of these things meant we need to get resources to people as quickly as possible. And the West Midlands Fund reached £10,000 within the space of a month, which was extraordinary. And it meant we could get money to people really, really quickly. And what that told us was how quickly it is to move resources when we're leading by trust, when we're removing some of the barriers and the bureaucracy around funding and around the way that funding works in a typical sense in the industry. When we start to remove some of those barriers and start to put in much looser and trust-based requests and hopes of people, we're able to get resource to people that need it. And what happened when George Floyd was murdered was we were having a conversation about race once again, and it felt like what was missing from the conversation was, again, how do we resource Black people? How do we resource Black people in whatever is needed? We acknowledge that a lot of Black people in particular were grieving, were reminded once again of trauma and pain, and they might need resources to focus on their healing or well-being, that some people wanted to work and needed to put their energy into making work. Some people just wanted to work out, how am I going to pay for my shopping or my children or my day-to-day needs? And so we created the Freedom Fund, which was in partnership with Culture Central, a citywide, a region-wide initiative in the Midlands. We partnered with them and crowdfunded just over £8,000 so we could make £500 bursaries available for Black artists. And it was incredible. We're still in conversation with those now, but it was another reminder that we need to get resources directly to the people that need it. But we needed to think beyond short-term solutions, beyond a crowdfunding campaign, beyond short-term funding cycles. How do we build physical infrastructure so that the value that is generated from land itself could meet some of these aims, could cover the basic and material needs of artists and people in communities that need it? And so we come to where we are right now. We very recently digitally launched Yard, which is the art house and residency space. Yard is the first phase of a really ambitious plan to develop an artist-led hotel called Abuelos in the city of Birmingham. And this journey has been incredible, but it's also been really brutal. We're starting to realise the inequities in and around land in a way that has really materialised over the last couple of years. It felt like, that there is a dream for physical infrastructure, but we need to have that economically sustainable. We know that if we're reliant on public subsidy, when that disappears, Black-led organisations, particularly arts and cultural organisations and charitable organisations, are the first to disappear, are the first to be disinvested in, are the first to go without and have to make alternative arrangements or close their businesses. And we couldn't afford for that to happen. So Abuelos essentially takes the cultural sector's hospitality spend and invests it in a locally owned bit of infrastructure, as opposed to a shareholder-led initiative. And what it means is we couldn't just create something that, you know, was economically sustainable. It has to be spiritually sustainable as well. We're not trying to recreate from the precedents around us. This isn't about recreating, you know, another white cube art gallery or theatre in its traditional sense. We're trying to recreate from the precedents that bring us joy. And I think in lots of our organising work, particularly in our digital and physical organising work, so much of it is about organising for joy. I'm tired of the anti-oppression work. I'm tired of anti-racism work. What does it mean to invest in pro-Black spaces, pro-Black communities, and how does that benefit a much wider section of the population? But I think shifting that mindset has been fundamental to us. But this understanding that land played such a significant part of the inequities that we've experienced of 2020, it felt like when the Colston statue did topple, it felt like the perfect opportunity to bring forth the Black Land and Spatial Justice Project. So I started that in June of last year, realizing that land plays such a massive part of all our organising work, but all of our social justice injustices in the UK. The Black Land and Spatial Justice Project started with a £30,000 crowdfunder, and we knew that like £30,000 does not bring about, you know, racial justice. It does not bring about land justice by any means, but giving that a name, giving it a figure, allowed people to rally around it, allowed people to amplify it in a different way, and that we were able to move beyond that, beyond the £30,000, to invest in really decolonising our frameworks around land, really understanding all of the ways in which space and land affects the things that are possible. It affects things like how neighbourhoods are gentrified and how communities are displaced. We know that there's a direct relationship between art and culture and the power that that holds and the displacement of people. And we know that ultimately the power of what we create is held by the landowners and the people within whose buildings and spaces we inhabit. So part of the Black Land and Spatial Justice Project is really just to unpack that, but understand that even through oppression, even through systemic injustice and brutalism and violence, Black people have constantly found ways of organising. They've constantly found ways of building sanctuaries and safe places and joyful spaces. And we want to see what that looks like when it's resourced. So I'm gonna leave it there and just say I'm really excited to get into our conversation, and thank you again for the invitation.
Thanks, Amahra, and thanks to all our panelists. So we've got a bunch of questions appearing. I know I've got like a million things I want to ask these guys. So it's, you know, it's incredibly inspiring hearing everyone talking about all the stuff that they've been up to. And one of the things that really interests me is how in different ways all these projects that we've heard about, you know, from different angles, really cut to the roots or cut to the central strand of various things that are going on politically in this country. Like I was struck by, you know, when Stella was speaking, I was struck by all the things we know about how the power of representation and seeing the world look differently, even in pictures or whatever, what that means in terms of how people perceive the potential for social change. You know, in Michael's work, that, you know, it hits on this real nub, this real knotty issue of like, you know, it's not just that there are statues of slave owners in this country. It's that, you know, in the immortal words of George Bernard Shaw, talking about Liverpool, like every brick there is cemented with blood from the slave trade. You know, this is a city built on that stuff. I was struck by that once working at the South Bank Centre and realising that the South Bank Centre was built at roughly the same time where the British had engineered a coup to overthrow the only democratically elected government that the country my father come from had ever had. Amahra, the question of land, man, again, I just, that made me think there's this, you know, this fundamental question in this country about like us becoming what feels more and more like a rent-seeking country. You know, there's a statistic, isn't there now, that banks in this country for about 20 years have been much more likely to spend much more money on giving people mortgages than they do on funding new businesses. You know, so this is a very central question for us. That being said, and looking at this moment a few months ago, and then sitting now in a time when, you know, not to put too fine a point on it, 43% of people in this country, according to the opinion polls, seem hell-bent on voting for governments who are pushing a culture war, which I think wants to sort of silence these kinds of conversations. I was just wondering, my first, so to start with a big question, I was wondering, like, if you guys would be able to speak on how you think our kind of work might have cut through and contribute to chipping into that sort of 43%. Do you know what I mean? To being part of that resistance. So I don't know if anyone wants to go first, or I'll put myself on mute. You guys jump in.
I think I want to really honor what you said about the presentations, and our work has been about getting to the root of, because in many ways sometimes the word radical is like overwhelming and quite scary to people who think, you know, have preconceived notions of what that means. But the, you know, the etymology of radical is like radish, to get to the root of, like, and I see that in the context of work. Like, I'm particularly interested from a Black land and spatial justice perspective. What does it mean to take up space? When we have, like, in this country, you know, the statues and the monuments is almost like a testament to a philosophical belief that society holds in the UK. And so much of what we understand about space, about rights, about who has the right to take up, about, you know, how we organize as a society, has stemmed from philosophers like John Locke, who was like, he was like one of the British forefathers. They call him the father of liberalism, right? So, and we talk about the arts often as like a neoliberalism sort of rooted industry, but John Locke was like the father of liberalism. And he was one of the people who helped us understand that property rights and how we understand, like, law in relation to property. He said that any man who works on the land has the right to own it. At the time that John Locke was coming up with these theories and in conversations with you know, fellow contemporaries, he was directly invested in chattel slavery. He was simultaneously dehumanizing African peoples and talking about mankind being able to own land. And it's no wonder then that this is the person who we call the father of liberalism, who has taught us everything that we have come to believe about land and space. It's no wonder that there's a direct polarization in terms of how we occupy space in the here and now, in terms of how art has a direct relationship to gentrifying places, in terms of, you know, Stella and that movement needing to physically take up space to go against these oppressive forces. It stems right back to the philosophy in terms of how we think about space. I wanted to start there and then and see where we go.
Any more for any more? We could.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's loads in there, isn't there? There's loads in what you've just spoken about, Amahra, and there's loads in your kind of question and setup, Javad. And I think that for me, the question around silencing is a really complex one. And yes, our work is contributing to, for me, definitely the work around Black women in theatre, around We Are Visible, around All of Us, around Here to Stay, is about recentering the question of silencing to one that's much more internal. That, you know, my concern, I'm less concerned with who's silencing me, and much more concerned that our silence is not self-generated. So once people find a voice, you know, once people understand that there is some merit to their kind of lived experience, I'm much more concerned on centering on that than I am about, you know, how do we prevent somebody from silencing us, whether that's government, whether that's societal. The most dangerous silencing for me is when it's done personally, and the most long-term silence is when you've had your voice, get a bit scared and silence yourself, because that's harder to come back from. So for me, you know, the whole idea of the We Are Visible campaign wasn't to say, look, we're here and we're in this space and you've got to see us. It was saying to other Black women in theatre, do you know these people? You need to know these people. and you need to contribute to the whole telling of the story of what it means to have a sector where we are in it. And that to me is much more important, because it's so often overlooked, because we are rarely starting the conversations around race. We are rarely the starters. We kind of we join at some point. And one of the things that I think all of these campaigns have in common is becoming the starting point. You know, a lot of it is born out of complete frustration. I cannot talk about these things anymore. Can we get to the action? And that's the driver. And so for me, it is about, you know, the question is, in the face of all of those, that kind of construct that you gave, the question isn't who's silencing us. The question for me is, well, what are we going to do? What are you going to do? Because until we get to a space where the individual is powerful, we're able to surpass what capitalism tells us we should do, which is it's all about the individual. But we're starting from a starting point, a starting block, where our rights to protest have been completely decimated over decades and decades and decades. And so in order for us to have the sense of the collective, we've got to have strong, powerful, empowered, vocal individuals. And so for me, this is the space that I want to occupy. I'm no longer interested in what's going on over there. I want spaces where we are gathering and we are empowering ourselves. We're getting stronger about, you know, and having conversations that are important to us amongst us. You know, there's so much that we don't get to talk about because of where a lot of these conversations start from, and they're much more important.
Thank you. One thing we have to get used to in these like pandemic times is like, I was like, you know, just Stella, that was a wonderful contribution. And I wanted to be like, you know, as you would normally do, like, thank you. And then I realized I was on mute. So there we go. Michael, I don't know if you have anything you want to throw in on that. You're on mute, bro.
Sorry, I think Stella and Amahra just really summed that up really quite nicely, really. So yeah, I'm cool.
Thank you. Yeah, we've got some questions from the audience through, which is very interesting. I'm a little bit frustrated about that because, to be honest with you, as a recovering philosophy graduate, I want to talk about John Locke. But that's for another time, man. That's for after. That's for the pub. Do you know what I mean? When they reopen. In any case, really interesting, slightly really interesting question that gets to the heart of some controversy. Evelina asks. Some people have criticised certain ways in which the Black Lives Matter movement worked. I presume she's talking about England more than the US, let's say, but you know, that's me putting on it. Because I presume she's talking about black squares and so on, defining that movement as a form of slacktivism. So her question is, and that would be a way of sort of summing up other movements as well. Her question would be, do you agree that that is a correct analysis? And do you have a problem with slacktivism, or what do you think of it? So anyone really, do you know what I mean?
I think slacktivism, that's the first time I've heard that term. I'm not really sure what it means, but I guess with the Black Lives Matter, I mean, I think let's go back to the riots in the 1980s. This is before I was born, right? But let's look at what was going on in the country then and how did people react to the uprising, because that's how I would see what happened in the 80s in Bristol, in Brixton, in Manchester, in Liverpool. I would see that as an uprising because of the racial injustice that predominantly Black people were feeling because of the sus laws. People were criticized. Stigma, there is still stigma around from when that happened in the 80s, 40 years ago. There's still people they're still stigmatized by what happened. I mean, certain people don't go to certain areas because of, you know, it's a dangerous place to go or whatever. I feel like, you know, protest movements, they will always get pigeonholed, even if you take Black Lives Matter, even if it started off, even if it's grown into a big organization, right? The essence of it for me is pretty obvious. It's pretty sort of, it should be clear to anyone. But I think a lot of people in this country, especially, just believe that it's, you know, it's happening to those people over there. It's not happening here. you know, all lives matter. I mean, this is the sort of responses that you get to Black Lives Matter. So, I mean, it's kind of irrelevant whether or not it's slacktivism or not, because I think what results that it generates, I think that's what's more important. The results that are created from any sort of activism, whether you're sat behind your computer or you're out in the streets marching, or you're, you know, physically trying to dismantle things. I mean, I think activism comes in all shapes and sizes, really. So I don't know, slacktivism, I mean, you could term it as slacktivism. We are in 2021, everything's online, people do things digitally, all sitting on in the comfort of their home. So, I mean, you can say that that's people being slack, but I feel like it's all needed in order to get things changing. So yeah, that's my thoughts.
Can I come on the back of that as well? Because it feels like in many ways there's often this conflation between Black Lives Matter as a movement and Black Lives Matter as the organisation, and an organisation that is founded within the realm of capitalism, so therefore it has legal obligations, you know, and that it has to be accountable to certain things, whereas the movement for Black lives is actually something that's very different. And I feel that we are like, who are we to politicize or antagonize the rage of people? No, like however they feel when it comes to the movement for Black life, which is fundamentally making a demand to not harm Black people, to not harm us. There is nothing about superiority. It's saying don't harm us. We are human, we are people. We don't want to be hurt or violated by the state, by other people, by police, by policing, all of these things that we've antagonized that demand somehow and said, oh, you know, well, it's an organization. Actually, there are a lot of things that happened. The Black Square thing wasn't a Black Lives Matter organization, you know, campaign. That was a campaign that was started by some people in the music industry, but somehow there's been a massive conflation, and all of that then says, look, that's that Black Lives Matter bunch being unruly again. You know, I think we have to be really, really, really specific when we're talking about what is it that actually hurt you? What is it that actually upset you? What was it that you actually didn't like? What was it that was actually slacktivism? You know, what are you specifically talking about in relation to those things? I think we have to get very, very honest with ourselves about what we're critiquing, because ultimately I think the way that a lot of Black people see it is you're critiquing our right to live.
Thank you. Stella, any thoughts? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I it's an interesting term, and I'm like Michael, I'm a little bit unfamiliar with it, and I'm kind of unpacking it as people are talking and thinking, well, you know, with all there is something very different about the call that is made by lots of people. You know, Black Lives Matter is presented as a new phenomenon, and it really isn't. You know, you go back as far as, you know, Black Panthers, you go back very, very far in order to find where have we started to ask about our humanity being respected. It goes back very, very far, and so there's that which has always been present that kind of shines a little light or amplifies that kind of call because it is historical. I think where it differs in this moment is that it's kind of combined with the digital space, which in itself is slackism in some people's minds. So I think to conflate those two things together is slightly unfair. And I agree with Michael that I kind of feel like it's the result of those things. You know, whether we were talking about, you know, the peasants' revolt in whatever century, or we were talking about labor rights, people responded differently to those movements that were massive and had huge impacts, changed laws, regulation, totally changed the landscape of England in particular. And I think that this is a similar kind of environment, in the, you know, there's an opportunity to just be a warrior on your laptop, or there's an opportunity to take the heartbeat that you hear, match it to your own and do something, and there's room for all of that. And so in some senses, I guess, yeah, maybe there is some slackism in there, but it's allowed because people should be able to do what they can do from where they are. What we are saying is that those of us that are absolutely ripe for a revolution, get out of the way. You know, if someone wants to be typing, that's fine, that's cool. But there is this whole other dimension that somehow gets caught up in all of this, which is an opportunity again to silence officially, to silence and to what's the word I'm looking for? To kind of devalue what is at the heart of that. And so what is at the heart of that should remain part of the agenda and part of the narrative. And it doesn't really matter whether the organization is great, good, fair, however you want to TripAdvisor it, fine. That's not the most important thing. The most important thing is that there is an echo for the millions and millions of lives that are here today that have also been lost, of a generation of first wave immigrants who have been making these kind of calls, and that is more important.
Thank you. Really substantive answers, and I feel like we ended with a very strong call to arms, so that's always a good place to land on. Yeah, and I think one of the things I would just offer about the slacktivism, so-called slacktivism thing, is like actually, like, the internet, the digital world is just like a space now in which politics moves across from one to the other. Like, I mean, clearly the Me Too movement, obviously patriarchy still exists, but clearly the Me Too movement has in fact changed the world. And that literally started off on Twitter. Do you know what I mean? That's so there's a huge sort of cross-pollination. You think about the Arab Spring and all kinds of things like that. I'm aware that time is moving on, so I wanted to throw a couple of questions at you guys and just see what I want to take them. One is from Deandra, and one is an anonymous question, which feels quite nice and mysterious. In any case, the questions really are about going, Stella raised the point that the most dangerous form of silencing is the personal one. So the question is, what are the strategies around supporting individuals to speak out or be vocal when there might be very personal repercussions as a result, backlash in the workplace, in their community, or orchestrated by the state? And a sort of sub-question part of that is there how, in terms of that support, why might we embed or acknowledge heritages of resistance and protest, which, if, like as Stella was saying, gone for generations before. So I think there's one question, which is that very, for want of a better phrase, like a technical question about how do we do that support, and then this kind of like broader question. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of think that it's not easy is what I want to start with, headliner, when you're thinking about individual voice raising, or even just acknowledging that there is something that's echoing inside. I think that it's not easy. What I've found that works, which is probably the only thing that I could probably share, is the use of networks and connecting with other people. You know, I don't always go into my workplace like with a burning flag and a fork in my hand. I do in my head, but you know, it doesn't have to be an exploration of that's violent in nature, or that's agitating. The first agitation has to be inside. And so for me, that's about how I'm connecting with others who might feel the same way, say the same things, and setting up those kind of support systems. There's something about understanding, for me, really important, understanding those personal triggers so that the workplace becomes as safe as you can make it, so that we're not looking for those outside to make our workplaces, or, you know, for many of us, there's, you know, my thing is going into the NHS hospital environment where some of those race dynamics come into play when I need regular treatment. So it's not just about the workplace, it's about all of those different spaces. And it is about the networks that we're part of, and the thoughts that we have, and how we allow history to help us to feel empowered. You know, as I keep saying, these things are historical and have a heritage linked to them. The way that I've definitely feel empowered is by connecting with those voices that have gone before, and using that as a way to feel strengthened, to feel emboldened. I don't think it's not an easy one for me. Maybe the other panelists have better answers, but for me, it's about networks, it's about the use of history, it's about making connections and understanding where you sit within any given construct, if that makes sense.
Thank you so much. And I love this, like, I absolutely geek out about speaking about heritages of resistance and protest. Any excuse for me to speak about my grandparents, I will take it with like both hands. But I want to answer both of those questions with how important community is, and I mean community in the deepest sense of the word. Who you're in trusted, committed, reciprocal community with. And I can talk about this in relation to when the Birmingham Rep announced their Nightingale Court relationship. There were a lot of particularly black artists and Black staff members who came together to kind of just express with each other their hurt, their pain, their frustration, their frustration that there was no consultation involved, that there was no negotiation, that there was no consideration of Black life within that, and the ongoing impacts of that. And it felt like if we were going to publicly say anything out loud, that we would be at risk of losing jobs, of losing commissions, which affect our very real material needs. So I want to acknowledge how very severe in lots of ways the implication of speaking out can be when you're worried about livelihoods and literally making it to your day-to-day. And I think one of the things is you cannot do it alone. It's not safe for you to do it alone. I can't even say, you know, you have to put yourself in that situation when you feel the fire. That might not be safe to you, but I would definitely always advocate for building and being in deep community. When I think about my grandparents and their generation and how they organized and how they came together, like, you know, house shares were like normal. The fact that they couldn't access mainstream banks, so they set up partners, which were effectively their own savings systems and banking systems, because mainstream banks wouldn't allow them to take out loans or to take out mortgages, so they couldn't access property. Like all of those things are, I really cherish acknowledging and learning from it, but I also cherish being able to practice. What does it look like doing that now? So a few of my friends and I, we set up a partner last year and said it's not just enough for us to save within ourselves. How could we set up an investment scheme alongside the saving mechanism? So then we're talking about building a new infrastructure that's rooted in our ancestry. How do we talk about the space? So building yard, it's not enough, like I said, to build from the precedents of, say, an art gallery or, you know, a theatre, but the spaces that bring us joy, which are my granddad's home, the home that he made for himself. The reason why we've called it Yard is a celebration of ancestry. It's a celebration of heritage, of resistance. Abuelos is Spanish for grandparents. And it's really about embedding, like, how do you have the feeling and the spirit of that resistance that birthed joy into physical environments. I think that's something that, for me, absolutely acknowledging and understanding, but also practicing in the 21st century is something that we should all keep doing. They knew what they were doing, and generations before that knew what they were doing. I would geek out about like Harriet Tubman and sci-fi and, you know, time travel, but I don't think we have time for that now.
Michael, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, heritage of resistance. I think, like, if you look at the Black community, I mean, my grandparents are from Dominica, small island in the Caribbean. But just like Jamaica, they had a big maroon community that were on the front line in the resistance against slavery. And if it wasn't for those people, you know, that sort of form of slavery would still exist today. So I sort of draw back on, you know, things like that, being from Bristol, and understanding the history of Bristol with the Bristol bus boycott. Its own version of the civil rights movement happened in this country, something that's not taught about in school. We learn about Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King, but we don't hear about, you know, the people from Bristol, like Roy Hackett, Paul Stevenson, Guy Bailey, that were at the forefront of boycotting the buses because they wouldn't employ Black people in the 60s. Again, as I said, the riots that, you know, started first in Bristol and then spread across the whole country. I take sort of solace in those heritages, like, you know, being of Bristol heritage, being of Caribbean heritage. I take solace in that, and that is what really inspires me to move forward. And just echoing what everybody else has been saying, community is so important. Being, you know, within the community, understanding the dynamics of the community. That's really important. And you will probably find other people that are like-minded as well with you. So it's always good to sort of make sure you've got, you know, a support network around you. That's really important. I mean, yeah, I think that's really key.
I wonder if, Michael, I could just add something, because in a way, we've described the ideal, and that's what we all aim for. But I also think it isn't just about like-minded people, it's like-hearted people, because, you know, definitely if you think about culture and the cultural sector, you know, it kind of encourages the manifestation of some habits and ways of being with each other that are more aligned with competition, what can I get, you know, and community that we're talking about, and the community that I know of in particularly my younger days. Those things weren't so threatening and prevalent and outside. So I think it is about finding people who are like-hearted, because you can find people who are like-minded, but you need to only commune with people who are heart-minded, because otherwise you are in a space that may be unsafe, and it might take a while to not notice that.
Thanks for that, Stella. Thank you. I'm aware we're going 2 or 3 minutes over time. We need to rush off to a virtual pub to find like-hearted people, have a conversation about Harriet Tubman, sci-fi, and John Locke, and the Bristol bus boycotts. Basically, that's what we need to run off and do. I would just drop a final thought in about that stuff, and this is just my view: is that yes, pressure can be brought to bear on people and stuff, but sometimes it is worth going to war on stuff, and it's about having the people around you and then doing it, because, you know, I'm aware not everyone likes us. We don't have to like everybody. That would be my final thought on that. But thank you, guys. Thanks everyone for tuning in. I've had an amazing time. What an amazing panel. I hope you guys have enjoyed it and got as much out of it as I did. This is the last Hello Culture for this edition, but do keep your eye out for a little bit of extra Hello Culture at the end of April. So huge thanks today to Lara Ratnaraja, who curates this programme, with Chris Brown, Shirley Benson, the producer, Gareth Peel, the Etch producer, and Wendy Osmond from Subtext Live for closed captioning. Thanks also to the Arts Council of England for funding Hello Culture, as well as the BBC Academy. This is, of course, part of their Digital Cities programme. So I'll look forward to seeing you all around. Thank you.